Today we're talking about how you can make your very own basic six-wheel chassis using some GoBilda parts for your first robotics project. This would be really useful as a first drivetrain, say for an FTC robot, or as a beginner starter rover or autonomous robot. This rover is going to have six-wheel drive with an Omni Wheel drive at the front. They're going to be connected via chains at the back, and then it's also going to have a drop center. This tutorial is going to be pretty similar to the GoBilda Beeline chassis. The main difference here is that this one's actually going to use 4 motors instead of 2, and it's going to have a drop center, which is going to increase your rotational speed a little bit more for this robot. So let's go get started. First things first, you want to make sure you have a nice, clean tool bench working on a surface where you have to find things. It's pretty frustrating. So get all your parts in order, get it organized, and we'll get rocking. So I'm going to grab a 17-hole U-channel here, and I'm going to grab a Yellow Jacket motor. This one is a 312 RPM motor. I would suggest you actually use 435s if you're going to be doing this competitively. It's going to get you a little bit more speed than a 312 will put out, and in my experience it makes your robot a little bit faster, and it also helps with some cycle time. So I'm going to count 3 holes over, and then I'm going to mount this point in vertically. You can mount it this way. It's going to be easier to get access to your tools because of the sides of your motor over here. Now I would recommend at this point that you use some Loctite on this motor. I'm using 10mm screws here, by the way. I would recommend you use some Loctite at this point. You don't want your motors coming out in the middle of a match. That would be a recipe for disaster. So, if you know how to use Loctite already, great, go have at her. But if you don't know, I'll put a video link in the description down below about how you can use Loctite. So what I'm doing is the first one I'm only putting in hand tight, so I can make sure that I can actually I think I screwed that first one in a little bit too much. So I only put that first screw in really loose, because what happens is if you tighten that first one in all the way, you're not going to be able to get access to the other threads, because this is a slot. It's not actually a 4mm hole. And you can have a little bit of play in where these things actually go. So now I'm going to come back in a cross pattern. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these 4 up. And as a note, I'm not using any Loctite today because I'm going to be taking this apart later. And I've now got 4 mounted in. My motor is nice and stable there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a 30-tooth pinion gear to the top of this. Now a pinion gear has 2 set screws on it. And these set screws allow it to stay on the axle that you place it on. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this on. Grab a 2.5mm Allen key, and I'm just going to do these ones very loose because I want to be able to move this gear later, because I'm going to have to adjust it. Now I'm going to grab a couple pillow blocks, and I'm going to mount these with 8mm screws. The reason why I want to mount them with 8mm screws is what will happen if you lose too long of a screw, you'll actually go through this threaded hole, and you actually start busting up into this hole here, which means if I want to use these mounting holes later, and I've got a screw all the way up, it's going to be bad news bears. So at this point, I'm going to count 5 over. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to mount this one on like so. Again, you want to use the shortest screw that you can, because it's going to save you a lot of time threading it on. I find this little Gridfinity bolt organizer absolutely invaluable at this point for threading these things on. Again, I like to get these things just hand tight first, just to make sure that I'm able to get all of my threads in. Now this part is actually going to be for mounting our main chassis support to later. Oh, I'm in the wrong hole here. And now I'm going to come back up in a cross pattern and really tighten these in so that They're nice and snug. Again, you don't have to go crazy on these things. Wrenching them too much is actually not going to help you. Now I'm going to count 12 over. So I'm going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 holes over. And on the 12th hole, or on the 6th hole from the right, I'm going to put in another quad pattern block. I like to just take these, start them up with my fingers. Just makes life so much easier when you go to actually mount them in later. Sometimes these can be pretty awkward to get your fingers in place. Lift it up. Again, I like to twist my little T-handle. I love these little T-handle wrenches. They're awesome for getting yourself just a little bit of extra torque. And compared to an Allen key, it's going to save you a whole bunch of time. So, got our first main little section of our sub-assembly here. Or for our main assembly, sorry. Now we're going to make a couple different sub-assemblies. We're going to need 2 Sonic hubs, and 2 14-teeth sprockets. I'm going to grab myself some 18mm screws, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Sonic hub, and I'm going to attach the thread on top. Now, what's important here, I also make sure on these sprockets you have a threaded hole and a non-threaded hole. I want to use the through holes because the Sonic hubs that I'm using are threaded. So I'm going to go on like so, and I'm going to drive through some 18mm screws through my clear hole into my threaded hole. Just want to double check that none of my bolts are showing through. When I'm my sub-assembly, so I've used the right size here. So now we're going to get ready to do a drop center. And what a drop center is this allows our, typically because we're making a 6-wheel chassis here, all 6 wheels will be contacting the floor. Problem with that is it adds a lot of unnecessary traction and it's going to make turning a lot harder. So we're going to use something called a drop center, and what a drop center does is it makes that center wheel slightly lower to the ground than the rest of the robot. So it allows you to kind of do this little tilt so that at any point in time, you only have 4 wheels connected to the ground. And because you only have 4 wheels, your center rotation is a little bit smaller and you're able to spin a little faster. It makes you a little bit more maneuverable. So I'm going to count over to the center hole, which should be number 9. So I'm going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9. And because our robot's actually do it like this, the drop center, you can tell it's actually slightly offset. So this side here is actually longer than this side is with the text. So I want to flip it around like so that the GoBilda sign is facing up. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and mount this in with some, again, short 8mm screws and a lock nut on the other side. Sometimes you can hold the nut and then twist your fingers as well. So you kind of got to work between both materials here. You could use a nut holder here. I'm going to use a 7mm wrench because it's going to make it tough for me to reach some of these points. And let's snug that up. Give this one another little snug up. Same thing up here. We're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. Again, we're going to make sure, because we're building this upside down, our GoBilda words are going to be on the bottom. And you can actually notice now that if I were to flip this around, you can see that it actually drops the center down by about 2mm. So in this case, I'm going to put the GoBilda words facing down. And let's do the same thing on this side. So at this point, we're going to add a second motor. Again, I'd recommend you Loctite this. We're going to add the second motor here on slot number 1. So let's go ahead and do a little hand tightening on these screws here. So I'm just mounting this one in on slot 1. We're on hole number 1, sorry. Again, I recommend you hand tighten some of these on first before you actually start screwing them down so that you can make sure that your holes are aligned. Come on. There we go. Get off my point there so we can actually balance a little more. There we go. And one more, like so. All right, let's go ahead and tighten these down in a cross pattern. Okay, and let's put another pinion gear on. We're not going to tighten this one down though. Now we're going to grab an 80 millimeter rec shaft that is 8 mil wide. We're going to slide it through like so. So we're going to put a ball bearing on in that section. We're going to put a shim. Actually, we don't need a shim on that yet. We're going to go ahead and slide this through, and this is going to be a little bit snug, I'm telling you now. Let's slide a shim on. We're going to put another 30-tooth pinion gear on. Not going to tighten it down yet. On the other side, we're going to put that other sub-assembly we made earlier with the Sonic hub facing out. We're going to put another shim on like so, and then another ball bearing with the flange facing out. Push that all the way in. We're going to mount this Sonic hub against this point. What I'm doing is I'm pushing pressure against the axle this way, and then I'm pushing pressure against this way while I'm holding this with my thumb, that ball bearing with my thumb, so that I can tighten down this Sonic hub to make sure everything's in a nice spot. Let's give that another little rotation here. This part gets a little bit harder now that we are fighting through two motors. Oh yeah. Get that one tightened. And now let's go ahead and tighten up our pinion gears here with our little set screws. And I'm going to put on a hub here so I can rotate this thing around, get myself a little extra grip. I'm going to line up these gears here so that they are all nice and in a line. And make sure that I am tightening all of these set screws, because you definitely don't want your main drive gears coming apart. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I need to get this point constrained, because you'll notice that right now we can slide this whole point out. So I'm going to put one more shim on, get a hyper hub on, push this all the way in against, and again, just a little hand tight. And then now we can really snug it up. Again, you don't need to snug these things like crazy. And there we go. Now we've got our points nice and tight, set up, ready to go. Go ahead and start mounting the rest of our axle points here. So I'm going to put another ball bearing through. Slide that on. So we've got a shim on. We're going to put on a 10-tooth metal sprocket. We're going to put on our other little sub-assembly we made earlier. We're going to slide that all the way through our drop center. In our drop center, we're going to add a shim on, and then another ball bearing with the flange facing out. Like so. Beautiful. Now, because we've got this drop center unit on, we need to make sure we leave a little bit of space between our Sonic hub and these bolts. So I'm actually going to back this off a little bit so that we don't run into our points here. Okay, that's all snugged up. Let's put our other hyper hub on. Put a shim on the outside. Throw on your hyper hub. And let's go ahead and clamp this down. Alrighty, we're now set up and ready for our next phase. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of space on here so that I've got enough space on both sides of my bolt. So I'm going to push this one back a little bit, and then I'm going to tighten down those set screws. Remember, there are two. I've only got one in the set screw right now. That should be fine for tutorial purposes, but you should definitely have two. So let's go over and make our last wheel point here. I'm going to go in and do one hole in from the center. I'm going to grab a ball bearing, throw it in on this side. Same deal, another 80 millimeter. Next head, go ahead and throw a shim on this side. Put in our other 10-tooth sprocket. And then slide that all the way through. Put on another ball bearing. Put on another shim. And on the outside of this one, to constrain it together, we're going to use a Sonic hub. This Sonic hub is going to face out, like so. And let's go ahead and clamp this down. So now we're nice and constrained. Now at this point, you want to make sure that your sprocket here is lining up with this sprocket. So I'm actually going to push this all the way up against that ball bearing, and that's going to make sure that I'm nice and lined up. And I'm going to tighten that down. Again, 2 set screws. I'm only got one here. Just makes it a little bit faster. So that's our base setup for our unit. Everything's moving nice and smoothly with our ball bearings. And let's get ready to start adding some chain here. I will tell you that chain, I'm going to use the plastic chain from GoBilda. This stuff can be a little bit frustrating to work with. I've got a full tutorial with some tips and tricks for working with GoBilda chain down below that I'm going to leave a link to. It's going to make your life a little bit easier to get this working, because even I struggle with this sometimes. And if this is your first time working with plastic chain, you're going to get frustrated looking at me, seeing how easy I make that look. So I'm going to slide this chain in below, and we're going to rotate my gear here so that I can slide it over that chain. I'm going to put it underneath my other unit here, and again, I like to kind of line it up and rotate my hub here so that I can kind of start pulling my chain along with me. I find it's easier to get it through that point. I think I'm getting caught up in that hole. There we go. We'll go ahead and pull this chain all the way through. And this chain looks like it's a little bit too long. So I'm going to line it up. I'm going to see, okay, if I were to pull this taut, what link would cause it to come together? It looks like about that length, so I'm going to break it here. And at this point, I find that using a pair of needle nose pliers really helps with getting your chain connected. Awesome. Make sure I get both units on there. And that's looking pretty good. Now let's get our chain wrapped around on the other section here. I'm gonna grab another slightly longer length here. This one's a little bit easier to feed through because these 10-tooth sprockets are not near as long. So again, rotating them around can really help you get that chain up and over so that you know that you can reach. Okay, let's see. Looks like I'm probably going to need about another 3 links to get that going. So let's grab another 3 links here. It's going to be 2 or 3 links. You can go ahead and count these out, but honestly, I find that counting it out takes more time than just getting a bit of a ballpark estimate. Let's see if I was correct on that 3. Yeah, looks like that's going to be about right for my tension. So let's grab my needle nose pliers here. So I'm going to rotate this around. I personally find it easier to use my right hand for this. Depends if you're right-handed or left-handed, but sometimes you kind of get those patterns where you work really well on one side. So let's get that nice and taut in there. There we go. And that should be a pretty good tension for my chain. Not too much tension, not too little tension. You just don't want to have so much tension that you're actually adding friction to the system, and not so little tension that you're going to lose tightness on here. So let's get our wheels on now. I'm going to use 2 of GoBilda's Rhino wheels in the back. Now if you look at Rhino wheels, you've actually got a shallow side and a deep side. We want to make sure that the shallow side is facing out and the deep side is facing in. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some 18mm screws here with some washers. Anytime you're adding something to plastic, you definitely want to add some washers because you want to add a little bit of extra increased force surface area. I've got a link down below on those kind of fasteners if you want to learn more about washers. I recommend you Loctite this. This is on your main kind of movement drivetrain. You definitely don't want these things falling off while you're in the middle of driving. So let's grab one more here. And we're going to add these Rhino wheels to the 2 back hubs. Let's line them up. I like to just get them finger tight just started, and then we'll use our drill to really tighten them down and speed that process up. So moving on to our Omni wheels here, we're going to need 2 Omni wheels. We're going to need a 4mm spacer and a couple 30mm bolts here. What we're going to do is we're going to attach these together and then actually mount it into our sonic hub. So when we mount these together, we're actually going to put this spacer in between. Again, you've got threaded holes and through holes. We want to make sure we're going through the clear holes here. We're going to place this in the middle, and then we're also going to place this Omni wheel on top sandwiched. Now when we sandwich this, we want to make sure that we offset it so that this wheel is beside this wheel. So they're not actually on top of each other, they won't spin. If you rotate it, so you're kind of offsetting each one. So I'm going to go ahead and throw one bolt through, throw my spacer on, and then throw my other Omni wheel on. And then we're going to repeat the same thing. Make sure I'm not going through a threaded hole. Holding these with my fingers just to make life a little bit easier. Like so. And now we're going to match this up onto our sonic hub so we can get our finger tight holes here. There we go. Well, this one can be a little bit annoying to start getting your threads matched up. So let's see here. I need to change my angle so I can look at it from the ground. That makes life a little bit easier. There we go. Finger tight so I know that I'm in. And now we'll do again a cross pattern. You don't want to over torque these ones, but you should definitely Loctite these ones. That's my new favorite motto for this. You should definitely Loctite them. Okay, so that's one half of our chassis done. Our wheels are now ready to rock, and if I flip it around, you can now see that I've actually got this kind of drop center thing going on. So this one is the lowest, so I can actually rock back and forth between these two. So at one point my center rotation's here, and if I'm rotating again with more center rotation this way, that'll make life a little bit faster, a little bit smoother for us. So now we're going to take this exact same module, but we're going to mirror it on this side. So you need to take all of these, all the steps we just did, and just build them in the opposite. So for instance, if we put all the wheels on the outside on this bar, all the wheels are going to go this way. So what I would recommend is flipping it around and having it beside you as you're building it so that you can know that you're mirroring those two parts. So I'm going to go mirror these, and we'll come back once they're mirrored. So at this point, you should hopefully have two of your sub-assemblies set up here, and one should be mirrored to the other side. So let's actually do the final connection points for this. The last thing we need to do is add in our sort of supportive braces on the sides here. So I'm going to grab I believe this is a 10 length, 2, 4, 6, 8, yeah, it's a 10 length, and I'm going to attach it up on this side. And then these little pillow blocks here allow you to actually attach in on the side. So I'm going to go ahead and throw some screws in here on the edges here. The reason I'm not using the top is because I want to be able to have some more freedom of access to attach some different points when I want to on the top. And let's put another 2 in here. I like using my ball end screw here, or my ball end Allen key, because it allows me to tighten in when I'm going in on an angle. Again, I've got a video down below if you're not sure what it is I'm talking about when I talk about a ball end Allen key. Let's just go ahead and tighten that all up. We're going to do the same thing over here. Again, I'm going to hand tighten these as much as I can because it's about to get frustrating to start tightening these in. And this is where that ball end comes in real handy, because here you won't actually be able to get this screw in if you don't have a ball end, because you can't actually go in straight anymore. You kind of have to come in on a bit of an angle. And the last one. Again, you're going to be thankful for having a ball end on these last couple, because these last couple can be a real pain getting in around those motors. Let's double check my handiwork. I should have 4 machine screws here, 4 machine screws, 4 machine screws, 4 machine screws, and that's it. Your basic 4-motor drop chassis is done. This thing should perform relatively well as a first robotics drive chassis. You've got lots of space to build things on top, and then now we can really see that drop center point, so that rather than having all 6 wheels contacting on the floor, we only have 4 contacting, and that should improve our rotation angle. So I hope you found that video useful, and best of luck on your next robotics project.